Good morning, friends. I have finally finished Numbers 14. That's the chapter that I'm on. The name of this chapter, the name of this chapter is Faith Over Fear. This chapter, I'm not starting this over. This chapter is about fear, unbelief, rebellion, intercession, consequences, and the faithfulness of God. Verses 1 through 9, the Israelites are consumed with fear. So in 13, Moses had sent them out to go check out the promised land. And they came back with a report and huge, ginormous grapes and fruits. 10 of the 12 spies emphasized the size of the descendants of Enoch in chapter 13. All the Israelites heard of this and grumbled, complained. Through the night of this report, they weep, complain, and wish they had died in Egypt. They even talked about choosing another leader. Moses and Aaron then fall to the ground, and they're praying and pleading for God's mercy on the Israelites for all their complaining. It was an act of complete surrender and reflected profound pain and shock over the community's sin and lack of faith. Joshua and Caleb, those were 2 out of the 12 people, tear their clothes, which in those times, it was a sign of grief, and begged Israel to not rebel against God. They said, trust God. He was there, and don't be afraid. Faith doesn't always stand in the crowd. We have to be willing, like Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and, Caleb. Put the wrong name. Caleb. To stand alone. Because they believed God's presence was greater than the giants, and we have to believe that God's presence is greater than our giants. Sometimes faithfulness means standing against the crowd. Jesus stood faithfully when others rejected him. Verses 11 through 12, God responds to Moses to Israel's unbelief. God's glory appears at the tent of meeting. The people were complaining. And God says, how long will they reject me? How long will they refuse to believe after all the miracles I've performed for them? Israel had experienced the plagues of Egypt, parting of the Red Sea. They had seen these miracles. They've seen the manna, God's provision. He made down manna. He even brought a ton of birds, a ton of quail. God's presence and his protection, God's guidance. And yet they still said, God can't do this. He can't defeat these big giants so that they could, occupy the promised land. The Israelites' fear turns outward in physical violence against Joshua, Caleb, Moses, and Aaron. They talked about stoning them, which was a biblical execution method for blasphemers. But the rebellious assembly treats the faithful leaders as traitors. God allows his servants to be tested, but he remains their ultimate defender, who intervenes in just the right time. His blazing glory, whether it was a blazing light, a cloud, a fire, called Shekinah glory, comes down to the tent of meeting. God tells Moses he will strike them with a plague and make a new nation with Moses. It's like, my goodness, everybody's just complaining. You know what, Moses, I'm tired of it. I'm just going to strike them down, and we'll just start the new nation of Israel with you. Verses 13 through 19, great intercession. Moses interceded again for the Israelites. He pleased to God's reputation among the surrounding nations, because the surrounding nations had heard of all these great miracles, that God had performed for his people, for the Israelites, for this specific nation. And they knew that God physically resided with them in the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of night by fire. They knew about the tabernacle. Moses even quoted scripture from Exodus in his plea. Exodus 34, the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Moses is begging for God's forgiveness. Even after they talked about stoning Moses, he said, Lord, I know they were talking about killing me, stoning me and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb, but please forgive them. Effective prayer focuses on the glory, character, and promises of God. Intercession stands in the gap. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. He said, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He stands in the gap for us, and he bared our judgment to secure our pardon. Verses 20 through 35, God forgives, but there are consequences. God forgives them, but every Israelite that complained and grumbled against the Lord will not see the promised land. What he's telling Moses. He tells Moses that they will dwell in the wilderness for 40 years. Their children, who said, when they heard that there were giants there, they said, our children will be their plunder. So the children who they said will be their plunder for the current inhabitants of the promised land will suffer along with their parents for 40 years in the wilderness, until every last one of the adults 20 years and older will die. Their children will be the ones to inhabit the promised land. Caleb and Joshua will also inherit the promised land. They will get to go to it. They are going to be their leaders. 40 years, I'm just fascinated by those numbers because I'm a number weirdo. But why 40 years? Because they had went out to the promised land to scout it out for 40 days. So it was 1 year for each day that they were gone scouting the promised land. That's why and 1 day in the wilderness. That's why God said 40. Their unbelief affected their future. This teaches us to not confuse God's grace with permission to continue in rebellion. That generation disobeyed and tested God 10 times. God even said, they have complained against me 10 times. So I said, well, okay, I remember some. So I went back to look. The first time was Exodus 14, 10 through 22. They panicked at the Red Sea and said, oh my gosh, we should have stayed in Egypt. Second time, Exodus 15, 22 through 24. At Marah, they complained about the bitter water. And if I remember correctly, Moses threw a log in to make the water sweet and able to eat. The third time, Exodus 16, 1 through 3, they complained to Moses and Aaron. They took them out of there to starve. You and God just brought us out here to starve to death. So that's when God provided the manna. Number 4, hoarding the manna. God told them you can only get so much. Don't try to get some and save some for tomorrow, because God said, I'm going to provide it for you every day. But of course, sometimes we don't listen. So there are some that tried to hoard it overnight. And when it got up the next morning, the manna had become rotten, had worms going all through it. Number 5, don't gather the manna on the Sabbath. That was the day to rest. God was going to provide extra the day before. Still, some went out to look for it anyway. The sixth time, Exodus 17, 1 through 4, at Rephidim, they were faced with another situation of lack of water. They argued with Moses aggressively, so much so that Moses, Lord, help me, they're going to kill me, they're going to stone me. And I believe that was the time the water came from the rock. Number 7, Exodus 32, 1 through 4, the golden calf. This is when Aaron just threw the Israelites under the bus. Moses has come down from the mountain. You heard singing and dancing and all this stuff. And he gets down to the mountain, and here's this golden calf they created. And Aaron had said, well, they kept giving me this gold. So I took the gold, I threw it in the fire, and then out of the fire came this golden calf. The 8th time was in Numbers 11, 1 through 3 at Taberah. They started complaining about the things that they were going through and difficulties in hearing the Lord. God was angered, and he set fire that consumed the outskirts of the camp. The 9th time was Numbers 11, 4 through 34. They were complaining about meat. They said, oh my gosh, I miss the fish. I miss this, I miss that. Why did we ever leave Egypt? The Lord sent, that's when the Lord sent a lot of quail, where I think, if I remember right, because this wasn't that long ago. Let's see, what chapter was it? Numbers 11. So 2-3 chapters ago. But so much quail that it piled up about 3 feet high and a day's walk in each direction. Just the quail surrounding them. So the people went to go get the quail. Some of them indulged and just ate and ate and ate, and they died. Numbers 14, 1 through 4 at Kadesh. And that's where we're at now. That's when they heard about the giants, and they threatened to pick a new leader and stone the current ones. 36, so there were the 10 times. 36 through 38 verses. The 10 spies faced judgment. The 10 spies who spread the bad report. They said, okay, yeah, let's fill them back with milk and honey, but look at the people who live there. Oh my gosh, we're never going to be able to do it. God will never be able to do it. God strikes them down with a plague, and they die. Only Joshua and Caleb survived because they were the only ones saying, hey, don't complain against God. He's here. He's going to help us. We can do this. They followed God wholeheartedly. The 10 spies influenced the entire community of Israel toward fear and rebellion. Our words, what we say, what comes out of our mouth, can either build faith or spread fear, encourage obedience or encourage rebellion. God notices faithfulness even when it seems like nobody else does. Joshua and Caleb were surrounded by unbelief. Their colleague of spies, they're surrounded by unbelief. But God knew their hearts, and God knows our hearts as well. Verses 39 through 45. Presumption is not faith. So after the 10 spies spread that fear of rebellion throughout the camp, again, God strikes them down with the plague. Well, the Israelites are grieved by their death. Israel says they are now ready to go to the promised land. I'm kind of thinking they were possibly they've been scared. So, oh my gosh, I don't believe struck down by a plague. Or maybe it was out of revenge because their 10 leaders had died. These were leaders of the tribes. But Moses says to them, he warns them, he said, don't do it. God hasn't said yet, don't do it. Because he's not going with you. God will not be there. They go anyway to the land of Canaan. And they are defeated. They suffer a crushing defeat by the Amalekites and the Canaanites. Forgiveness cleanses eternal guilt, but earthly consequences often still remain. Jesus teaches us that Christian living isn't about trying harder. It's about abiding in Him. It's like it's like we're calling out to Him where we need to be. where I'm telling him, help me do what you are calling me to do, no matter what obstacles come in the way. So, as the Israelites saw the giants, they saw them and they went, they got scared. They forgot what God had already done for them. I don't want to ever forget God's goodness anymore. Why the tears? Well, after I saw one of Alex's friends over the weekend, and she said so many good things. Please forget I said that name. But she said so many good things about my son, and then I talked to another friend and remembered good things about him, remembering him, not as Egypt. I got another message yesterday from somebody from a different state, because he could. He was like a magnet for people to be friends with him. And they were good friends. They would go to the ends of the world with him if they needed to. So, again, I thank God for those blessings. Yes, they make me cry. But it is a blessing to hear my son as the person, and not as the person held bondage in Egypt. I miss him so much. But God has done so many good things for me. And I have to trust him while I'm waiting. And waiting can be difficult. Because there are things I so badly want to happen. There are. And I'm sure that there are some things that you want to happen too. But we have to wait. God knows what's going on, and he's working. The main takeaway I got from this chapter is a reminder that the same God who was faithful to me yesterday, and the day before, and the months before, and the months before, is still faithful today. Even when I don't know what's going to happen in the future, or if I can't see the promised land yet. I hope your day is full of God's favor. Peace and blessings. I love you. Bye.